Hi, this is the Tiny Movie. Today I explain a supernatural horror movie, Antlers. Come and join me. In the small town of Cispus Falls in central Oregon, Frank Weaver runs a meth lab out of an inactive mine. His son Aiden, who is playing around the mine, is frightened when he hears a sound and returns to the car. Frank assures him that the sound is because of they're working inside the mine, and there is no need to worry. But when Frank wants to return to the lab, he hears an eerie sound. However, he returns to the lab where his mate is packing some kinds of stuff. Constantly the freakish screech getting closer. Frank lights the fusee and walks into the tunnel gate, but the screech echoes from behind. Suddenly, in darkness, a horned creature attacks them.
Frank!
Minutes later, Aiden enters the darkness after hearing the uproars, after his father. Days pass. Julia Meadows is a schoolteacher nearby. While talking about the importance of storytelling and the history of past generations in Oregon, she asks students to give her an example of a fable or myth. In her class, there is always a quiet student, named Lucas, who is very much a fish out of water. Lucas doesn't talk to anyone and anxiously sketches most of the time, and because of that, he's always bullied by some of his classmates. After school, 12-year-old Lucas spends his time roaming the town, collecting roadkill, or killing small animals before taking them home. Day after, at school, while reviewing storytelling, Julia sees Thomas's drawings again. She asks him to tell them a story of that drawing. This time, Thomas has to speak. The sketch is the story of 3 bears.
Big bear, little bear, and baby bear.
The bigger bear takes care of the other 2. But when got sick, his insides turned black, and lost his job and became meaner and angrier because of no food. Until one day, the little bear came home and the big bear and baby bear were different. Fear fills the whole class. Julia thanks him in a way that indirectly tells him to stop. Julia gets very suspicious and curious about Lucas and his behavior and thoughts. Lucas is harassed again by his classmates after school. When he's examined by the school doctor, Julia worries more about Lucas's physical and mental health. She begins to suspect that Lucas is being abused and becomes determined to help him, spurred by her own experience of childhood abuse at the hands of her mentally ill alcoholic father. Since her father's recent suicide, she returned to Cispus Falls to be with her brother Paul, who is the local sheriff. Julia calls Lucas's house, but no one answers. She chases Lucas after school, and tries to bond with a troubled boy in an ice cream store. Lucas understands the meaning of Ms. Meadows' questions, which indirectly wants to know more about his father, Frank Weaver. He doesn't answer her questions, asks his teacher not to follow him anymore, and says goodbye, and leaves. Assuming that Lucas is home, Julia goes there, but seeing the unusual situation, she quickly backs off when she hears strange noises from inside the house. At night, at Julia's house, she puts together one of Lucas's torn and discarded paintings. She faces an eerie image. At the same time, in Lucas's dark house, he's cutting meat for someone upstairs. When Lucas goes upstairs, his father runs like an animal and grabs the meat, and returns in the dark. The pale, lonely, disturbed Aiden is there too. Lucas quickly leaves the room and locks the doors. Day after, before leaving for school, Lucas prepares a trap in the forest when he discovers that a native hunter has found a half-eaten corpse there. At school, Julia is convinced that something bad. She searches inside Lucas's belongings, and finds out that Lucas is reading books on animal killing and trapping. She finds the rest of Lucas's scary sketches. Julia shows all the sketches to the principal. Both are shocked. The principal decides to go to Lucas's house this morning to talk to his parents. That native hunter reports the body to Paul. Julia finds out about the incident when she sees him. Paul tells her a man was half buried in the woods, and he guesses that the other half was found in the mine near a meth lab, but he thinks it was probably a bear or a cougar, something that hunted that man. The corpse is reported to have been eaten by a human at autopsy, which is unbelievable to the police. While Lucas and the other kids at school are watching a classic movie, Ms. Booth, the principal, arrives at Lucas's house and enters through the back door, which was open. All dark, and no one is there. Meanwhile, while other kids watching the film, Lucas, ignoring the film, shapes a horned monster with his knife on a piece of wood. Julia is paying close attention to him. Unlike Julia, Ms. Booth doesn't leave the house, seeing all that eerie atmosphere there. She goes upstairs and hears the sound of a child moaning behind the locked room. Frightened, she unlocks the door and walks in. Blood drops can be seen everywhere in the room. She sees Lucas's brother and walks towards him, but is all of a sudden attacked from behind by freaky Frank Weaver. The ex-Frank starts eating Ms. Booth like a predator, and kills her. As he feasts, the flare inside Frank's heart begins to grow stronger. Minutes later, a horned beast suddenly tears Frank apart and comes out of him. Inside the mine, the police are in the lab to examine the other half of the corpse. There, they find a piece of antler. The native hunter, not believing the antler to belong to a buck, he advises the police not to go further inside the mine. On the way back to school, Lucas hears a hellish screech. Frightened, he goes faster but is again interfered with his classmate. He wants to beat Lucas, but a terrifying monster with a giant antler appeared behind them at the top of the tree. Lucas runs away, but his classmate is ferociously hunted and eaten by that monkey. Lucas returns home. He finds the corpse of the Milliseconds Booth upstairs, eaten. Blood is everywhere. Dreading, the 12-year-old kid wipes all of them. He goes outside and covers the principal's car so that no one would ever know she was there. Seeing the traces of blood inside the house, he learns that the beast was his father indeed, who had run out of the window. At Julia's house, her brother asks whether she has seen Ms. Booth today, as her husband reported her missing because she didn't return home and didn't answer the phone since morning. Julia informs him that she had asked her to visit Frank Weaver to talk to him about Lucas. Upon hearing this, Paul and his fellow, Dan, go to Frank Weaver's house. The hellish house smells like death, which makes Paul suspicious, but because they haven't yet received the warrant, they have to leave to return tomorrow. The next morning at school, police received a report of a boy missing from his mother. Julia is convinced something is wrong with the Weaver family. She goes to Frank's house again. Seeing Ms. Booth's car there, she quickly alerted the police. The police rush into the house and find Ms. Booth's body eaten viciously. In addition, they find a flayed, charred skin of a body which is to be sent for autopsy to determine its identity from the tooth. Paul and his colleague guess it's up to Frank that it looks like something just burst out of him. Lucas, who is always in the woods collecting meat, returns home. Julia calms him down, and the police take him to the hospital. The doctor considers Lucas's condition to be very critical, both physically and mentally, and tells them that Lucas is a deeply damaged boy. Lucas in hospital recalls the early days when Frank locked himself in a room and asked them not to get anywhere near him for any reason, because he knew he'd getting sick. The next morning, Paul and Julia reach out to that native hunter and ask him if he wouldn't mind just telling them what he made of that Lucas's sketches and that mysterious bag that had been tied to the roof of the mine. The hunter is upset seeing the papers. Pointing to the antler found in the mine and a photo in a book, he starts explaining to them about the creature in the mine, which is a mythical beast, and describes a tale according to a legend about a lost hunter's severe hunger, which drove him to cannibalism, and after that, he became crazed and transformed into an amorphous spirit that could take many forms, and then roamed the forest for fresh victims, but he will never be satisfied. The mystical beast called Wendigo, diabolical wickedness that devours mankind. Accepting this myth in the real world is comic for Paul. He believes that it's just a myth. But the old native hunter notifies him all indigenous people believe this myth. He informs them a Wendigo is eternally starving, and feasting makes them weaker, and a man can kill him only by extinguishing his beating heart, only when he's in his weakened state. Julia and Paul return to the city in astonishment when suddenly Paul is reported that a corpse has been found that has been horribly dismembered. Reaching there, Paul is informed that the body belongs to Clint Owens, Lucas's missing classmate. When Paul sees the corpse, he asks the coroner,
"Tell me this was a train, Jake."
But he hears that
that boy was eaten in half. What the fuck is going on?
Paul and Dan are baffled. They don't know what to do as policemen. The only decision they can make is to report the case to the mayor. Paul doesn't want to believe that he should really have a mythological nature beast in mind as the cause of these catastrophes. He hopes there is a logical explanation for this, but Julia thinks otherwise. They return to the hospital and Julia releases Lucas from the hospital to take him home. Outside the house, Dan watches over Julia and Lucas until Paul reaches the mayor, discusses the case with him, and returns. Dan goes to take a look around. Lucas and Julia are inside the house. Julia tries to convince Lucas to talk, but he looks at Julia and warns her that his father will return to take him to the mine where Aiden is. Suddenly an eerie screech is heard. Dan goes to the sound inside the warehouse. Something inside a box is shaking. He's Aiden. Dan quickly reports the issue to Paul, but all of a sudden, hearing the sound, Paul hurries home. Julia tries to lock the door with fear, but Lucas runs out. Seeing Dan, Paul goes toward him cautiously, but suddenly,
It's okay.
after a moment, Aiden and the beast move away. Paul quickly regains consciousness and sits, but the bulletproof vest allows Paul to survive and keep the beast away when suddenly Julia rushes to the warehouse in terror. Badly wounded, Paul asks Julia to take him to the mine. On the way to the mine, Julia calls for an ambulance. Julia walks into the dark mine with Paul's piston and a flashlight. She discovers Lucas and Aiden, and sees that Frank has indeed become a Wendigo, who is currently feasting on a dead black bear. That beast turns his face to Julia when he sees the light. Julia can't believe the dreadful face she sees. She starts shooting at the beast, but Wendigo punched her and hides. Julia shoots desperately in the dark. Wendigo appears behind to hunt, but Julia turns around and shoots him. Julia crawls in the dark to find a way to escape, fortunately, sees a fusee and lights it. Wendigo can't stand the light and goes back unintentionally. Julia grabs the chance and thrusts an iron rod into Wendigo's body one after the other. But no use, Wendigo can remove the iron rod and attacks Julia, but unexpectedly, Lucas strikes the Wendigo-possessed father with a knife in the heart. He kills him. As the old hunter said, Julia pulls Wendigo's heart out of her body. The heat burns Julia's hands. Seconds later, Aiden begins to screech. The Wendigo spirit passes into Aiden. Despite Lucas's resistance, who believes Aiden is sick and will be cured, Julia convinces him that Aiden's illness isn't something that could be healed, and he's not going to get any better. Julia strikes Aiden in the heart with a knife, ending the curse. Sometimes later, Paul and Julia discuss keeping Lucas with them for a while despite concern he may become possessed as well. As Julia and Lucas leave, Paul begins to cough up a black bile, as Frank had when first possessed by the Wendigo. And the movie ends.